All right. So in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of push through the first half, and then there's an intermission of images of things that I find kind of fascinating. And then there's two projects at the end that I kind of want to show. So I guess just a follow-up off of the lead-in, my interest in architecture always comes as kind of a directorial profession, or one that curates atmospheric and visual, volumetric and kind of material effects in the production of new political atmospheres. In other words, I think that architecture can do two things. One, it can organize interior space, which for me is less about the planimetrics or the kind of adjacencies and more about sequencing entries and exits. And another thing is its exterior project, which I like to completely separate from the interior project because it has an entirely different constituency than the users of the building. And so for me, the projects have an exterior audience that demands a kind of bigger approach, and projects that instead of just kind of fitting within a context can choreograph or kind of curate their individual volumes into producing new identities and new personalities that relate to its constituency differently than, say, a building that represents something. So for me, the work is projective as opposed to representative. And so just kind of going through a few projects. The first one was just a competition for a museum of natural history, a 7,000 square meter museum of natural history in South Korea. And the idea was to kind of, instead of formulate a project that had any relationship to the interiors of its curated, I guess, museum exhibit, was to kind of provide something alien to its effects, so that you could view the prehistory, which was 50 to 150,000-year-old artifacts of the Incheon Peninsula without any kind of influence from a more recent historical effect. The way that I kind of approached doing that was dealing with grid deformations. This came shortly on the tail of leaving working for Peter Eisenman, and you kind of get infected in the head and have difficulty separating. Anyway, the purpose of the project was to develop an interior gallery space that had zero separation formally between the galleries, but only did it through matters of compression or elevation, so that you could actually produce sequences dealt through the section of the project as opposed to the partitioning of the project. So the interior galleries are entirely lateral. You can see the entirety of the exhibition all at the same time, so you're aware of the kind of extent of the history of Korea. So these are just some more images. The next project, and the first one's kind of group into the very visible effect of kind of formal choreography or kind of geometric effects. So the next one is a project for a library in the Czech Republic. The idea was to, instead of kind of developing a single form, would be to develop individual volumes that performed interiorly for their own library effects, and then they kind of swirled together to produce an overall building shape that isn't recognizable as an architecture, but it's more familiar and kind of understandable as a pet or kind of a friendly artifice within the city. The way that all of the projects work, and these are just some plans, is the majority of the work always kind of has a very organized interior for the back of the house, where you get these kind of moments of fissure where the project intersects its exterior shape. So again, trying to just have the exterior be exterior, the interior be the interior with zero relationship, and it produces sectional effects and volumetric effects instead of planimetric effects. So part of, I guess, my interest in the kind of curation or direction of architecture is understanding the way that material architecture works, in the sense of things as corners, plans, graphic patterns, volumetric choreographies, geometric effects, in a way that you can curate all of them as separate parts to kind of produce a whole. So instead of an authorial project like a book or a work of art, since architecture is something, I think, in the third, or I guess it would be the fourth condition, it is that all of these pieces individually kind of fuse together and synthesize a new context. So this was also the first project that I think I started to kind of play more with the graphic project of the exterior to kind of produce yet another effect that further separated it from the work of the building as a kind of pragmatic device. And they get better as they go along. But the idea was to kind of create a netting that, while not kind of reinforcing the geometry, projected the collisions that the shells made. So this is just it next to its kind of more traditional building. And so one thing just in the kind of the way I work that I think is at least it's important to me as I go through these things is each project linearly, in a kind of very dumb way, mutates into the next one. So the curves of one project become the initial curves of the next project. The new input is always things like site or program or whatever TV shows or things I was watching at the time, but there's a very kind of distributive process from the very first project I showed up until the end. There's gaps in the middle that I'm not showing. This was an urban project for a park south of Seoul, Korea, where they're redistributing the entire civic government from Seoul to a new city. The idea was to kind of diffuse the curation of city parks, at least within the West. They've come to be very regimented events as opposed to kind of more messy effects. The idea is to kind of take the stranded realities of the park and turn it into a banded program that then affected itself with different planning, so the entire project changed morphologically or kind of botanically throughout the seasons, and also geometrically with the way the terrain works, so that the rivers, which are the little black strands, actually manipulate the landscape depending upon rainy seasons or not. One of the things that was developed in the project was there's a lot of rainfall. So the kind of variation within the river goes from 5 meters to 27 meters of height, and there's a need for 18 catch basins around the park, as opposed to just having normal engineered catch basins. What we tried to do was develop a series of surface pores so that the catch basins would actually be an instrumentally performative part of the landscape and start to develop new interests in the otherwise kind of backdoor infrastructures of the city park. So this is a pattern I think I found most interesting within the project. The rest was not quite as important, and this is what we started to pull forward later, was the idea of kind of dotting patterns or spotting patterns within the landscape to kind of start putting forth a graphic program that actually moved architecture away from so much of a, say, building profession and more into kind of a cultural or political project. These are just some up-close views. And so that, as the kind of first project, was a way to start working with geometry, so that geometry wasn't such an expressive or excessive portion of the project, but actually started to be kind of a background that through a graphic application would start to become less resolute. So for me, architecture started taking a background role where you're not using it as the center of attention, but it's actually something that you can never look at in its entirety. And the graphic project was a way to kind of give it its own identity, so it starts working within the city. This is a 450-meter tall tower, also for Korea. This was Incheon, where the international airport is, so it's about 40 miles west of Seoul. And what we tried to do, apart from the curves starting to just kind of work within the way the form shaped itself, was to actually take the curve structures that have developed and start looking them as ways to organize the sequence of events through the project. So it was less about the adjacency arrangement or the size of the individual programs, and more about the amount of time you would spend in each one and in between each one, more importantly. So the program was all relegated to more or less the same size dot, with the kind of effect of the dot or the sphere of influence of that program represented as kind of a spherical echo. And then the sequence was how you moved from one to the other, which it wasn't entirely linearly or laterally. It was a kind of more mutative bag of effects. And also how the kind of natural energy